Hey guys, hope everyone's format's going well. Back here with another draft video. So far for me in Bro Draft, I found that it's a format where the rares matter a lot and there are a lot of high impact rares. Kind of similar to like a less extreme version of like VOW for those of you that played that format. And that's how sort of I've been feeling about it. And so I've thought that it's pretty important to stay open in draft, and I had a recent one that was a pretty good example of that I wanted to go through. So let's go ahead and jump in here. Okay, cool. Oh, so let me turn off these picks. So first looking at our pack here, notables, we have the rare is Greenland. This card is okay, I think. Making a 2/2 is definitely a powerful effect, but it can be awkward that you're milling. And it's a little expensive. I think I would play in most green decks I have, pretty much every green deck, but it's not a huge draw. Uncommons aren't especially exciting for me. The Steel Seekers can be good, but isn't like game breaking. And so here I think amongst the commons I'm on Cohort. Things I'm passing that I expect people to pick up, maybe like a Disfigure, maybe the Steel Seekers, so the people to my left may move into black or green, but I'm just going to take what I think is the best card here in Cohort. And so through here, again, not too much in the way of like super exciting stuff, but again, I like Cohort a lot. I think it's really good card. Not passing too much white, which is kind of nice, and of course it's literally the same card as my first pick, so it's staying on color. So yeah, not too like difficult for me here. Things to note: Giant Growth, Perimeter Patrol, so some green stuff, and not too much in the way of big rares. So yeah, we're not passing that much. I don't expect that I'm sending any major signals or anything like that. Okay, so this one is, I think, the first pick for me that becomes a little more interesting. So this is an example of where I think that it's valuable to take a card that may be a little bit less powerful or objectively a good card, in the interest of staying open. I think that in formats where there exist high impact cards you stand to open or be passed later on in the draft, that the value of staying open increases, and the bigger the gap you should be willing to accept in power level in order to remain open. So for example, if this was a format where there weren't really powerful rares or things that I cared about opening later, I might be more inclined to take a more powerful card. So for instance, I prefer Gigamole to Engineer, and I prefer Defiance to Engineer. Both of these black cards I think are better, but I don't think that they're so much better that I'm willing to jump into another color, and sort of my take on the format influences that decision. So here I'm going with the Engineer. Also a comment I wanted to mention as far as staying open goes, I think a lot of times people interpret staying open as just staying in one color, which a large part of that is, but there's also another component to staying open in that if the color that you're drafting, you can spread out your curve very well, then it makes you more flexible. Because when we say stay open, really the goal of that is that you're more flexible in your draft, right? But sometimes I've seen people end up in situations where they may have done a good job of staying in one color, but all of their 2-drops are in their second color, right? And so if they want to pivot out of it, then all of a sudden there's this huge kind of gap in their curve, and it limits the flexibility of what they can pick later on, because then they need to fill their curve. But they also are trying to do so in a way where maybe they don't have as much agency over that. And so you can alleviate that preemptively by having picked things that are early in the curve, even if this is not like a premier 2-drop. And there are plenty of decks where I end up maybe cutting this in favor of better cards, but by having access to it, it gives me more flexibility moving forward in the draft, not just because it's white, but also because it's a 2-drop, which is something that all decks inevitably will need some amount of. So here taking the Engineer, and then from this pack, I think Cavalry is the best pick. I personally am fairly high on this card. I think it's decided probably between this and Rock as far as, reasonable playables, and I think Cavalry is a clear step above. And it's on color, and I have the Soldier thing going on, so I think this is a pretty easy pick for me. Pretty fortunate that I can just pick up a nice card and stay in white here. Here, so some notables. Statue is in some decks very good, but is a little more narrow in that it doesn't go. You can't just throw a statue in any deck and expect that it's going to be great. Crusher is okay, has its role as well. I think that just as cards, Airlift Chaplain and probably Gaia's Gift are the two best cards in the pack. And the Vanguard is not too far away, as it's like a pretty good white 2-drop, and if I'm pressuring especially, it has nice synergy with Cohort that double triggers it, and so you can push a lot of damage with the Vanguard. So I like this card too, but I think Chaplain is the best one, and it's again in our colors, so I'm going to stick with it. Also noting it fills in a 3-drop slot, so our discussion of filling in the curve earlier, this is contributing to. Obviously, it's not like I did anything to influence whether or not I'm past the Chaplain, but just a comment that this is something that we want to be paying attention to in the draft. And so when we get to here, I think this is kind of the first major decision we have to make. So Iconoclast is by far the best card in the pack, and it's I think a fairly reasonable signal that it's here in pick 6. I expect people know this card is very good, and I would say that this card is better than anything that's currently in my pile as an objective measure of how good a card is, or its strength. But obviously it's in 2 colors that I'm not. So I think the discussion here really centers around how anchored you are to your current color. So for example, I think that Cohort is a very good white common. If, for example, let's say hypothetically, I don't have these 2 cohorts and instead I have 2 more Power Stone Engineers, then I might speculatively take this, because notice there's also not anything else that's really great for me here. But because I have what I would consider already 4 above average commons, so I have a large density of good cards, I have a nice curve, I think that it's sacrificing too much flexibility to really consider taking this here. I think that I'm pretty confident that I want to be white here given the cards in my pile, whereas I'd be less confident in that if I had worse cards. So that said, I'm going to try and take something that's a single color, because again, if I end up in that deck of the color of whatever card I pick, then I'll be more likely to include it, and I think that will result in taking a card more likely to make my final deck than something that I feel very strongly I don't want. So here I think I went with the Moment of Defiance. White-black kind of can like this effect, and I think that it's consistent with a plan where a lot of the white decks end up just curving out, and having a nice combat trick can be very useful. Thraxidemon is also playable in some of the grindy white-black decks, but I think that usually we want better ways to gain card advantage, and there exists better 2-drops too. So not that I don't like or play this card in some scenarios, but I think we want Moment more if we end up in black. Okay, yeah. And so onto this one. This is again kind of an interesting pick. I think that from a objective measure of strength, like we had mentioned before, that Blast Runner is probably the best card here, and that I think that a lot of people are kind of on board at this point in the format with the idea that Blast Runner is a real card and that it has a very powerful effect. That said, I also think that it's less open to take a Blast Runner than I think I end up taking this Subjugation here. And the reason why, obviously I don't have a card of either color, so a lot of people interpret it as, well, they each have, they're each adding 1 additional color. How is it more open to take this one than this one? And the idea is that in the scenario that I end up in blue-white, for me, typically there's 2 common blue-white decks that you can run into or build into. There's the artifact-based one that has Mightstone animations, and you'll want the couriers and the cheap cantripping artifacts. And then there's the soldiers one where you're just going to try and curve out and kill people. And I don't know which version I might end up with, even if I end up blue-white. If I end up blue-white, I'm going to want this in either version, right? So that's the idea. Also, no matter what deck you're playing, you pretty much want some amount of removal in it. It may vary depending on your deck's construction and strategy, but there is going to be a need for that. So in the same way that I may have taken a 2-drop earlier because it helps fill my curve, I'm taking a removal spell because if I end up in blue, I probably want a removal spell. And this is one that I like in those decks. Just because, again, it's pretty efficient. You have to take some damage, but usually that's not a huge deal, especially if you're going wide on the ground and you have access to some flyers. And then, so conversely, Blast Runner requires either to make some concessions in your deck or to get cards that you may or may not see in the draft. So like the things that I think are like best with Blast Runner are things like Bitter Reunion, which the red decks are going to want to play anyways. Like Bauble, which is, kind of a quote unquote free sack, or a like Chromatic Star, like these kind of effects. And of course, like Strong Bulls and stuff. But I don't know that I'm going to end up in that. And you don't always have access to the sacrifice stuff. And I've seen some people build decks where they know that Blast Runner is a quote unquote good card, but then they end up making concessions in their deck build in order to try and facilitate playing, a couple Blast Runners. But now all of a sudden you have these cards that maybe you otherwise wouldn't want to run in your red deck. And in particular with red-white, I don't think there are a lot of like sack outlets that are quote unquote free in red-white that you might run otherwise. Comparatively, like in some other ones, like in black, you might have like Power Stone Fracture, or even in red-black, I've seen, you can turn this on with like Thraxodemon sometimes because it's just a 2-drop and incidentally it's relevant that you can sack something. Whereas white doesn't have that same kind of incidental sack outlet, and because of that you sometimes are a bit more narrow in picking this. So even though each is one color, I think that it's more open to take Subjugation and more in line with where I may end up. So here, kind of a very similar discussion. Cliff Stomper requires more of your deck. You need to have lots of mountains, and so it's a little more narrow, even though when it's good, this card is a very good 2-drop. But again, I'm just going with Subjugation. I think maybe I might end up in something blue-white here. Okay. This one, maybe something kind of similar. Stern Lesson, I think, is where we're at. There's nothing in white for us here. Again, I'm not really interested in playing this. And I could take Moment of Defiance, but given that I think I'm leaning blue-white at the moment, Stern Lesson isn't super great in the Soldiers version of blue-white. It's playable, but not super exciting. But it is quite playable and good, I think, in the Artifact version. It keeps the cards flowing and it makes a Power Stone on curve that you can then animation. So that part is nice. And also, I think given that I have 2 cohorts, I can kind of make use of the Power Stone I expect, which is nice. So I think I'll take this and see where it leads. Here, not much for me. I think I just take the rare for the gem value, but if it was like a real draft, I might take like maybe a Giant Growth. I don't know, but I do have like what looks like it may end up being a creature-based strategy, so if I move into green, I don't mind having a Giant Growth in some of these decks. But yeah, nothing too important here. Same thing here. I think really not too much for me. I could take probably Raise for a sideboard card would be best. I think I just picked at random, not expecting to play any of these cards. Yeah. Here, I'm going with Rock. Again, could potentially be blue-white. So taking the Rock can be useful. I notice I'm not playing that much at instant speed here. I do have a Stern Lesson. But when I'm not doing that, Rock is kind of okay, right? It's not super exciting, but I'm not passing anything to take it here. Here, happy to see the Levitating statue back. If I end up in the blue-white artifact deck, this is a nice thing to pick up at low cost. I'm not big on Scatter Ray or the Survivor. The Survivor can be some nice sideboard tech against some of the like red decks that have like multiple mutts and stuff, like X ones. So I've cited this in sometimes, but I think Statue's the better pickup here. These ones are just take a creature. Oh, I think I took the Bone Saw. I think I remember my reasoning was that I thought that if I end up in like a weird deck, sometimes you end up with like 6 Power Stone, or not, the 6 Might Stone animation deck or something like that, where it's like you have just an obscene number of them, then you can defend playing like a really low cost but or low impact but zero cost artifact. Whereas this thing, I think there's really no scenario where you really want it in your deck. Maybe if you're extremely heavy soldiers, but even then, like, it is pretty unexciting. Cool. And so onto here, the first thing I looked for, again, anything in my colors. Military Discipline, I think, is a playable white card, but it's not exciting, and I don't think it's an effect that, you know, is necessary for you to have. Like, sometimes you'll play it. The more combat you're getting into, obviously, the better it is. I currently have a couple flyers, so, you know, maybe I'm not as heavy combat oriented because, like, I'm not battling on the ground, and I don't mind if the cohorts are trading off. So, like, you know, I don't have a huge incentive to want this. And the best cards in the pack, I think, are going with Explosion and Mutt, with Explosion taking a clear lead for me. And so I just take the Explosion speculatively. Again, my blue cards are not super strong. I do have these 2 subjugations, which is nice. But again, I think Explosion is better than any one of my blue cards at the moment, and I'm not passing much to take it. Okay, so here I'm looking, so for amongst the white cards, again, I can take Cohort or Chaplain, I think. And there's not really much else for me otherwise. Like, I have the one moment, I think, still, but it's not nearly enough black that I'm willing to take a Disfigure over a card that I think, personally, both of these I like more than Disfigure anyways in this format. And I think I'm just on the Cohort here. And so here, this is the first real risk that I take in the draft. So looking at what I have here, the Cavalry is a guaranteed good card in my deck, I think. Because, again, like I said, I'm very likely playing white because of the density of white cards that I have access to. And I think it's a totally defensible pick to take the Cavalry here. That said, I also think that a couple things. Firstly, if I end up not taking the Cavalry and taking the Explosion, because I guess I hadn't mentioned, but the Explosion is the only other real consideration for me here. And I take the Explosion, and in the scenario where it doesn't pan out, where I'm not playing, and I don't get there on red, and I'm not playing it. So one thing I noticed is I already have this rock, so I'm very likely playing blue-white in that scenario, and I have something to fill in the curve. Yes, I'd rather have a Cavalry than a rock, but I still have an additional thing that serves a similar role to the Cavalry in that it can attack in the air and end games. So that mitigates the risk of passing the Cavalry a little bit. And then also, Explosion is a pretty good card, just in the instance of if I'm not in blue, that I have another means of removal and pushing damage. And that I'm also making use of the Power Stone. Like, it's doing things that I'd like to be doing in this deck at the moment. And so I take the Explosion. I think it's a better card than the Cavalry on average. And for the reasons we discussed, I'm willing to sort of take this gamble. Again, this isn't by any means a commitment, though. I'm not now white-red. I'm just saying, okay, I think this is an acceptable risk. So here, looking at what we got, not much in the way of white and blue, but there is this Strongbow. Seeing as I've already speculated here, Strongbow looks like it's going to be, if I'm in white-red, going to be very good in this deck, given that I have multiple ways to create several artifacts with a single card. The Explosions make Power Stones, so this is, I think, kind of where I want to be if I'm in white-red, and I'm not passing much to take it here. So already I'm starting to lean more red, by the way, because between these two and the Strongbow, those 3 cards are each, I think, better than any of my blue cards, and I have 3 of them now, so I think I'm more incentivized to be white-red at this point. And then this pack happens. So this is one of those packs where you're just like, hey, give me the whole pack and let me go on to pack 3 or whatever. So this tells me very strongly that I think red is open. Amongst these 3, I think Stoneseeker takes the edge, and it definitely takes the edge given that I still have a small hole in my 2-drop slot. And making an artifact is nice with the Strongbow I just picked up, and it can ramp you into a turn 3 cohort. So there's a lot of things that are going for the Stoneseeker here. So I'm taking it. Sad to pass these two, but really happy to pick up a card that's now very likely to make my deck and very strong. Here, now I'm looking again like I'm white-red. There's a Mutt, which is a very good 2-drop in the format. It's an artifact, works with the Strong Bowls. Yeah, just pretty happy with it here. Unearth helps me push damage. It's just, I think, the best card. Just a comment about the Hero of the Dunes. It's a good card too, and I've seen people have a tendency to pick and splash like cards that have a strong effect, like Hero is very, very significant and powerful effect. But I think that's not really what you want to be doing in this format, is my take. I think I'm like just on MTG Arena, maybe 16, 17 drafts in, and I have some on MTGO too, and I think I've only splashed like once. And that's not to say that I'm necessarily doing it the right way. Maybe the other people who are doing things differently are doing better than I am. But my take is that the fixing is not that abundant, and that usually you want to be doing things proactive, and that splashing a lot doesn't really facilitate that as well. And that there is, I think, like I forgot what it's called, the green 1-drop. And there's versions of decks that run the green 1-drop, or a handful of them, and can play multiple colors successfully. So I'm not saying to not splash, but that I don't think I'm taking it here over something that's just straight up a good card, and I do need to fill my 2-drop slot. Here, not much except for the Whirling Strike for me, I think. This is a good way to push damage. I'm happy that, these don't necessarily attack through things with like higher toughness very well, and this gives me a way to accomplish that. So again, happy to take a Whirling Strike. No white here, no red, but I think I'll take the Wings. Just the idea that it allows me to push damage more. I have some reach in the deck with Double Explosion and Strongbow to help finish people off, as well as, a flyer here. And so if I can get the Wings to just push a little bit of damage, that's giving me another way to win games. Here, if I was heavier in red, I'd happily take the Cliff Stomper. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's just a very good 2-drop if you're heavy red, but I don't think I'm that heavy red at the moment where I want to take it. So I ended up going with the Rock Hunter, I think. Again, just in the interest of getting another 2-drop. I like having 2-drops that have higher power if I'm playing this Wings, which at the moment I don't know that I am or am not, but I think speculatively I might. And so that works there as well. And having something with reach is kind of nice early in the curve, because if you don't have to use your explosions on things and you can just trade with the flyer, then you can just throw their explosions at their face. So it gives you another route to kind of winning before your opponent's like big rares get online if you don't have any yourself. Okay, here I think I'm on Dragon Engine. I have a decent number of Power Stones between the Explosions and the Stone Seeker, and maybe this Engineer if I end up playing it. So, either casting it or pumping it are uses for the Power Stones. If Liza can push damage, I'm not huge on this card. I don't think it's great, but I could conceive of playing it here. Here I don't know what I took, maybe a Tower Worker or something, but I don't think I'm playing any of these cards. And so here, counting my artifact count here, I was checking, let's say I play the Wings and the Mutt, so amongst these, so 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 artifacts, which is not a lot, but again, it's still pack 2. So I think I take this speculatively. I may get there on artifacts. It also has some value when you have unearthed creatures. Like if you hit one of them plus something else, right? And then you can leave the unearth and you've gained value because you can now, haste it out. So I think I'm on the Scrapsmith. I think I take the Juggernaut on this one, just again, something at the top of my curve. And yeah. Here, lucked out a bit, opened a nice white rare. I'd love to say that this is a consequence of me brilliantly navigating the draft, but obviously when you just open rares in your color, that's just, you got lucky. And so I'm happy to pick it up here. I need a 2-drop. I don't mind adding a really powerful card to my deck, so this is really kind of where I want to end up here. Amongst these, I'm not really so high on Raise to the Ground in the main deck if I can avoid it, but I will play a main deck Disenchant. It being more efficient, and being instant speed's kind of nice, and there's enough targets that I think you can usually get away with playing one. Here, Static Net is great. It's maybe the best white uncommon. I'm trying to think what other ones are off the top of my head, but regardless, it plays very well. Having a way to remove big blockers when your plan is to maybe attack on the ground and push damage and then kind of finish your opponent off is very nice. We've already drafted some things that work well with Power Stones, and it's just generically very good. Here, I'd like the other Strongbow, but I think I'm taking another Static Net. I think it's just too much of a gap in power level. And like we said, for all the same reasons the first Static Net was good, second one still good. And then here, I think I'm going with the Escape. I don't remember if I play in the final build, but this kind of effect is a lot better when you have cheap threats that are great to protect. So Stoneseeker to an extent, but really it's there because of the Assembler, right? If you have something you can play for 2 mana and then hold up protection that will kind of eventually win you the game on its own, then something like this goes up quite a bit. So it's not a huge priority to play it, but I will in some versions, and I don't think I'm passing anything to get it. Domination, I think you can maybe play or at least sideboard in sometimes, depending on your matchups, but I think I'm on Escape here, yeah. Okay, amongst these, Recommission, I don't know if this is the deck for it, just because I'd rather be doing things that are proactive. If I was like grinding a little more or had better like ETBs, I'd be more inclined to play this. Even if I do have a nice curve, and a couple ways to mill in like the Scrapsmith and the Chaplain, I still don't think that Recommission is exactly where I wanted to be here. That said, I don't remember exactly what I took. I might take the Scrapwork Rager though, just because it's kind of inefficient, but having ways to draw through your deck, and it ups my artifact count for the Scrapsmith. Oh, I did not take it. It was all a lie. I guess I took this thing. In hindsight, I think I should have taken the Rager. I don't think the fact that I can pump this or whatever with a Whirling Strike or whatever is worthwhile. Maybe I just tunnel visioned on this not literally being a red or white card, but I think that it would be a better pick here, and I don't think that the Chain Dancer is going to make my deck. This one, I don't mind an extra flyer. Again, artifact count for the Scrapsmith. And I have a couple ways that mill already, so there's some value to be had there as well. Here, pretty happy to pick up the Vanguard. I could use 1 or 2 more 2-drops, and it has great synergy with the cohorts, so you get double triggers, deal a lot of damage. So yeah, pick this up. And I think we're kind of nearing the point where there's not really much in the way of things that I care about. So here we take another Survivor, just as a sideboard card. I think I probably don't want to main it. Here, just anything, maybe another Chain Dude or something, but I'm not playing any of these. Similar, I don't this can be a good sideboard card in some versions, but I don't think I'd really ever want to side it in this particular build. So just taking random stuff. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not playing a second Wings, I think, so yeah, just whatever. And Domination I can see playing in some versions, so I'll take that one, and that's more or less the end of it. The deck then ended up looking something like this. So the count here being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then not forgetting the Assembler, so 6 2-drops. I maybe wouldn't mind having one more, but Disenchant is sometimes interaction on 2 as well. And then generically just good cards all the way up the curve. Explosions and Strongbow Chaplain, and Cohorts on 4, and then Cavalry on 5, potentially Assembler Juggernaut. So the deck, I think, doesn't look like a super giant powerhouse, but I think it's very consistent. And I think that it does what it's trying to do quite well. So I actually like this deck a lot. We see the record 2-1, but it was a scam, because MTG Arena gave me a match loss after 2 wins and only 2 matches played. So this was actually a 2-0 deck. Yeah, so this is the deck. This was a sideboard. If you guys had any suggestions of things that you would add in or any questions about it, feel free to post or ask. And yeah, hope the drafts go well for everyone. See ya.